Everything we're focusing on right now is all about England and how England's going to play a huge role in the birth of our country, the United States of America. It all starts in 1607 when England starts to claim colonies in the Americas. And we know that between 1607 and 1733, England will claim a total of 13 colonies. We already learned the story of England's settlement of Jamestown, Virginia, which got them colony number one, Virginia. We're now going to talk about England's second colony that they will claim in the Americas, and this one might surprise you. They didn't end up claiming anywhere near Virginia. In 1620, England is going to claim the colony of Massachusetts. And I like to call Massachusetts, Massachusetts. And here's why. This right here is Virginia, all right, down here where they went up the James River and settled Jamestown. Massachusetts, as I like to call it, is up here, and it has this little U-shaped peninsula, if you can see that. That's why I call it Massachusetts. And it's an interesting story on how the second colony was so very far from the first. In fact, it was completely by accident because the ship that was sailing in 1620 that ended up in Massachusetts wasn't heading there. They were actually heading to Virginia, to Jamestown, where they had become a very successful colony growing tobacco. Unfortunately, the ship ran into a terrible storm and got blown way off course to the north and ended up way up here, too far to make it down to Virginia. So they ended up just staying there and deciding to form a village or a settlement there. And that was the start of Massachusetts. So that's what we're going to focus on next. We've already covered Jamestown, the settlement that started Virginia. Today, we're going to learn about England's second successful settlement that will start the colony of Massachusetts. And it is connected to a famous story. I'm not going to tell you what that famous story is yet. You might have a little hint here from this picture. But the reason that I love telling this story is because it is connected to a famous story, and famous stories have movies. So once we're done with this activity, we will be watching the little movie that goes along with this. So we are going to be doing another sketch to stretch. Now, obviously, you don't have the paper because you're not in school. However, I would like you to grab some paper that you can do your sketches on. All right. And of course, you will need a pencil. So we are going to focus on England's second successful settlement. The first was Jamestown, which started the colony of Virginia. The second, we will find out what it's called, because by the end of the sketch to stretch, you should be able to answer the following questions. So listen for the answers of this. First one was, what was the name of England's second successful settlement? So what did they decide to call their new town or village or settlement up there in Massachusetts? What were the colonists looking for when they left England? We know they were actually heading for Virginia, but never made it there. And when they were heading for Virginia, they were actually looking for something. Now, a little riddle for you is what they were looking for is something you cannot see and cannot touch. So we'll see what that is. See if you maybe have a guess there. You're also going to find out that the colonists needed some help, and you're going to find out who helped the colonists survive. And finally, you will get the answer to what famous story is connected to England's second successful settlement. So here's how this will work. The first time that I read this on the screen, you are going to just listen. But what's great about a video is that you can rewind as many times as you need, and you can pause as you need to. So you're going to listen to me read the paragraph. And I'm actually going to read the paragraph while it is highlighted so you can see what is very important. But then you're going to rewind back to the beginning of this little part for this paragraph and listen to me read it again and again, as many times as you need to. After the first time that I read it, at that point, you're going to pick up that pencil. And I know you don't have a box to sketch into, but you're going to go ahead and on your scrap paper, do your sketch, just like we did for Jamestown. All right. What's nice is I will be showing you my sketch each time since you don't have a partner in the classroom to kind of look at. So that might help as well. So here we go. Plymouth Massachusetts. So I've kind of given you the name already of that settlement, Plymouth. So here we go. On a cold day in September 1620, a ship called the Mayflower set sail from England for the Americas. Hopefully, you've heard of the Mayflower before. The 101 men, women, and children on board had agreed to work for a business near Jamestown, Virginia. The company would pay for their trip, and in return, the settlers, the colonists, would send them furs, fish, and lumber, which is wood. So you're going to go ahead and rewind and listen to me play that paragraph as many times as you need to while you are sketching a picture. You may pause it while you're sketching. And when you hit play, I'll be there explaining my sketch to you. All right, so here is my sketch. And in this sketch, you can see the ship, the Mayflower. If you do not have the Mayflower labeled, please label that because that is a huge clue as to what famous story this is connected to. And you can see that the Mayflower has on board 101 men, women, and children. If you remember, Jamestown was just men and boys. These are going to be entire families that are leaving England and heading to Virginia. Of course, you have the year 1620 here. And then the final thing I have in my sketch is that the English business paid for their journey. They gave them the money to take their journey. But in return, the colonists will have to send fur, fish, and lumber. So feel free to steal any ideas from my sketch. Now, let's keep going. Among the colonists on board the Mayflower was a group of families going to the Americas for a special reason. They were called separatists, or people who had separated from the Church of England. You see, at this time in England, everyone had to belong. Let me read that again. You see, at this time, everyone in England had to belong to this church. Those who refused to belong to the Church of England were not safe. So these separatists decided to go to the Americas where they hoped to have the freedom to follow their own religion. We call people who make a journey for religious reasons pilgrims. Now, don't rewind because I'm going to read it again much better than I did the first time, so you can have a better reading to rewind as much as you need to. Among the colonists on board was a group of families going to the Americas for a special reason. They were called separatists, or people who had separated from the Church of England. You see, at this time, everyone in England had to belong to this church, and those who refused to belong to the Church of England were not safe. So these separatists decided to go to the Americas, where they hoped to have the freedom to follow their own religion. We call people who make a journey for religious reasons pilgrims. Now, you've probably never heard the word separatist, but hopefully the word pilgrim is familiar. That is another clue. The pilgrims on board the Mayflower as to what famous story this is connected to. Feel free to rewind this paragraph as many times as you need to and go ahead and sketch. When you hit play, I'll be there to show you mine. All right, here is my sketch. I have the Mayflower here, and the people on board the Mayflower, I have them labeled as separatists. That's an important keyword. And it's showing that they want to separate or break away from the Church of England. And they're basically saying, we want the freedom to choose our own religion. And because these people are making a journey because of a religious reason, that's why we call them pilgrims. It's the definition of a pilgrim. Just like the definition of the word native is first or original, the definition of the word pilgrim is a person who makes a journey for a reason that has to do with religion. And then I thought it was important down here that the separatists are not safe in England. That's why they're making the journey. So feel free, please make sure you have the words separatist and pilgrim. They were both in boldface and underline. We want to make sure we have those key vocabulary words in our sketch. All right, next paragraph. Hopefully at this point you might be getting like a little inkling of an idea of what famous story this is connected to. The pilgrims on the Mayflower heading to Plymouth, or they'll end up in Plymouth, we know. All right, here we go. This is a long paragraph. The colonists had planned to settle in the land near Jamestown, Virginia, but the Mayflower was blown off course, by terrible storms. They eventually reached the coast of what is today Massachusetts in November of 1620. The settlers were not sure where they were, but they knew they had not made it to Jamestown. To help keep the colonists in some kind of order, the 41 men aboard signed an agreement or compact that agreed to make and obey laws for the good of the colonists. Women were expected to follow the laws, but were not asked to sign the compact. This agreement became known as the Mayflower Compact. Then, after signing the document, they boarded the ship again and tried to find a place that would be suitable for starting a settlement. It sounds like the people on board the Mayflower are really smart, smarter than the people who went to Jamestown. They right away got a set of rules in order, the Mayflower Compact. And unlike Jamestown, they realized they wanted to pick a good spot to build a settlement. So once they signed the Mayflower Compact, they got back on the ship and looked for a place that was suitable for starting a settlement, a good place to build a town. Feel free to rewind and listen to this as often as you need to. All right, so here's my picture. I have the Mayflower, and they're heading for Virginia, but you can see the storm here, and they get blown off course all the way to Massachusetts. There's that little peninsula. And then they sign it says 41 men, because women back then didn't have any rights, unfortunately. The 41 men aboard the Mayflower signed the Mayflower Compact, a set of rules. And then they said, all right, let's find a good place to start a settlement. Pretty smart choices. We would expect that things would end better for them than they did at Jamestown. Let's find out. In December of 1620, the Pilgrims landed at a place that they called Plymouth, named after Plymouth, England. The first winter was hard. The weather was cold, and there was not enough food. Many settlers became ill, and about half of them died. If you think about it, guys, they did everything right, and still in the first winter, just like Jamestown, half died. That's because you can't prepare for winter in the middle of winter. They didn't get to this place that they were going to settle down until the middle of winter, December. And so unfortunately, they didn't have time to prepare for winter, and about half of them died. But help did come in the spring. A Native American named Samoset walked into their village and said, "Welcome, Englishmen." Several days later, Samoset returned to Plymouth with a Native American who spoke English even better than he did. The man's name was Tisquantum, or just Squanto for short. Squanto might be another hint of what famous story this is connected to. Feel free to rewind as often as you need to for your sketch. All right, here's what I have. They landed in a place that they called Plymouth. Super uncreative. The place they left in England was Plymouth, England. When they started a new town, they called it the same name. They weren't even going to call it New Plymouth like Spain and France did. Pretty lame. But they're cold, they're hungry, and they're sick. And so half of them died that first winter. But then our hero in this story, remember at Jamestown, our hero was John Smith that saved the day. This time, our hero was Squanto. First, Samoset came, but then Squanto is going to be the real hero here for the colonists. All right, here's our final paragraph. This is where we're going to find out what famous story this is connected to. So you'll see what movie you're going to watch. Squanto stayed with the Pilgrims and helped the colonists communicate with other Native Americans in the area. He showed the Pilgrims where to fish and how to plant squash, pumpkins, and corn. He helped the Pilgrims to survive. Because of this help, the Pilgrims had a plentiful harvest in the fall. They planned a feast to give thanks for the food they were able to grow and the help they got from the Native Americans. They invited Samoset, Squanto, and the Native American chief Massasoit and other Native Americans to share in a celebration to give thanks. This celebration was the very first Thanksgiving, a holiday we still celebrate today. The first ever Thanksgiving. Oh, go ahead and rewatch this as much as you need to. And when you're done, I'll show you my sketch. All right, so here I have Squanto, and he's going to help communicate with the local Native Americans because he can help be a translator. He is going to teach the colonists how to fish and how to hunt and how to grow things so they get lots of food. And so when the colonists get their first harvest, they're going to have a celebration to celebrate this, to give thanks to the people that helped them, the Native Americans and Squanto. And that feast, that celebration was the very first Thanksgiving. And that is the famous story. So feel free to beg, borrow, and steal from my sketch. But it is time to answer our questions and see if you can answer these yourself. What was the name of England's second successful settlement? Well, they decided to name theirs Plymouth. They were not going to name it after their king because one of the reasons they're leaving is they don't like the way the king is forcing them to follow his religion. So they're not going to name it after the king like they did at Jamestown. They just named it after the place they lived in England. Hopefully you figured this one out. What were the colonists looking for when they left England? Well, they left England because the king was forcing everyone to follow the Church of England. And they wanted a place where they had the freedom to follow their own religion. So what they were looking for is something they cannot see and cannot touch. They were looking for religious freedom. Who helped the colonists survive? We know the first winter half died, but with the help of Native Americans, such as Squanto, they were able to learn how to grow the food they needed to survive. And what famous story is this connected to? This is connected to the story of the first Thanksgiving. So we know it's the story of Plymouth, which will lead to the settlement of England's second colony, Massachusetts, and the story of the first Thanksgiving. So see if you can pause the video and think about what fills in these blanks. All right, it is 101 men, women, and children on board the Mayflower. They came looking for 2 words, religious freedom. And even though they tried to do everything right, they made up rules, they found a good place to settle down, because they got there in the middle of winter, half still died in that first winter. Go ahead and pause this and see if you can answer these questions. All right, who taught them how to fish and grow crops and help them survive? That was Native Americans. If you were thinking Squanto, that would work also. The Pilgrims threw a celebration, which became known as the very first Thanksgiving. So, ladies and gentlemen who are watching this video, hopefully you understood that story. Tomorrow, you are going to get to watch 2 amazing videos. One will be Mr. Bett's version of the story of Plymouth, and the other will be a wonderful video, kind of like we watched Pocahontas. We are going to watch a movie about the Mayflower. So that will come tomorrow.